Hello there, people of the internet. This one's probably going to rustle some jimmies without question. In comparison to the bolt-action rifles it was going up against, the M1 Garand, however it is you want to pronounce that, depending on where it is in the world that you're at, without question the M1 Garand was by far the superior rifle. 8-round in-block clip system, 30-06 semi-automatic. You could stick a lot of lead downrange with this very, very rapidly. And it was typically going up against bolt-action rifles for the most part, if we're talking infantry rifle to infantry rifle. And for the most part, bolt-action rifles that it was going up against tended to be like a Mauser action. 7mm, 8mm, 6.5, and 7.7. Those were typically what this rifle was going up against. But these rifles are manually operated, and they operate with a 5-round internal magazine. These are not in-block clips, or at least this particular style of rifle isn't in-block clips. The Italians had an in-block clip system. It's like a Mannlicher style clip. But these right here, you actually have to strip the rounds out of the clip that you're using and shove them into the magazine. So not as effective of a system as the in-block clip system that the M1 Garand was using. And since they're a manually operated system, they were also slower to use, slower to operate. And they held less capacity because they had a smaller magazine than the M1 Garand. So all around, these right here were a less effective rifle than the M1 Garand. These right here do have some benefits since it is a bolt action system and there's no gas system or anything like that that can go wrong. These right here are pretty much like bulletproof. The reliability on these are infinitely reliable unless you get some mud or something inside of the locking recesses, or if your gun like physically breaks. However, with the M1 Garand, I have had several malfunctions on these things. Whether or not, you're firing and the bolt going forward doesn't pick up another round, or maybe there's been a couple of times where I fired and the clip retaining system just malfunctions and the clip comes flying out of the gun with ammunition still inside of it. There's been a couple of times where I've been using this thing and it has malfunctioned on me. And you also have to use the right kinds of ammunition inside of this rifle, or get yourself an updated gas system for this rifle in order to run it without actually damaging it. And that's just the fault of the system and how it was designed. It was designed for a specific kind of 30-06, whereas in a bolt action rifle like this right here, this doesn't care what kind of ammunition that you run through it. In fact, the Mauser 98 action is an incredibly strong action, and like whether or not you want to run 150 grain or 180 grain or 220 grain or 198 grain, whatever it is that you're looking to run through this Mauser will take it all, and it doesn't care about what kind of ammo you're throwing through it because it doesn't have a gas system that it uses to cycle its action. You do that manually. But I want to propose a bolt-action rifle, a fictional bolt-action rifle that does not exist, that I would prefer having over something like the semi-automatic M1 Garand. So let's say that we're talking about the time period back in World War II, right? During that time period, whenever the United States was using this self-loading technology, they were going up against the Germans along with other people, but going up against the Germans armed with 8mm Mauser rifles, 5-round bolt-action rifles. These right here were definitely the most common infantry rifle that those Garands were coming up against. But quickly in the war, Germany realized that they don't need a full power rifle cartridge, and they ended up adopting the 8mm Kurz cartridge. I think you see where I'm going here. If I had a bolt-action rifle that did not take the full power 8mm Mauser round and instead took a much lighter recoiling 8mm Kurz round, I feel like that would be extremely beneficial in terms of going up against something that takes a full power rifle round, especially at the distances that combat was taking place in. Now, one of the issues with these rifles is their magazine capacity. Well, 8mm Kurz was what was used in the Sturmgewehr 44, and I guess 43 as well, and technically 45, sort of. That's a whole topic for another video. But the Sturmgewehr magazines held 30-round capacity, and if you modified your Mauser bolt-action rifle to be able to take those Sturmgewehr magazines to where you could just like press a button, out, new mag in, you have another 30 rounds, cycle your bolt, get back to business, then that increased magazine capacity combined with the that's Kevin. Hi, Kevin. How you doing? Kevin's my peacock. I got 4 of them. They're all named Kevin. First time he started screaming so far this year. But combine that increased magazine with the reliability of a bolt action system to where you don't have to worry about, you know, the harmonics of the gas system reliably and adequately running your rifle, and you have yourself like some really good potential, especially if you get yourself a rifle that cycles very well to where you can cycle it nice and fast. The speed of you being able to cycle that rifle with the lack of recoil from an intermediate caliber cartridge and the follow-up shots that you would be able to get, even though you have to cycle the rifle every time that you fire the rifle, being able to cycle the rifle from an intermediate caliber cartridge and the lack of recoil it has would actually be like potentially faster if you get good at it, but it would be on par with somebody firing a full power rifle from a semi-automatic platform. And the 8mm Kurtz was powerful enough to be able to handle everything that you were needing to handle at the distances that combat was taking place at. So you get a 30-round, easily reloadable magazine, and you get yourself a bolt-action system that's nice and smooth, potentially even a shorter system, since the 8mm Kurtz is a shorter cartridge. Obviously, Kurtz means short or carbine or something like that. It's a smaller round. And 8x33 is like almost half the size of 8x57. Not quite half the size, but almost half the size. So you would only need like a very, very small receiver and a very small bolt to be able to cycle that thing. And since that throw would be so small, you could cycle that nice and fast. And you could, I mean, that would be a very reliable system because it's a manually operated system. And you could reload that very fast. The Sturmgewehr just reloads with a push button. You push that button, mag out, new mag in, close your bolt, and go back to taking care of what it is that you were looking to take care of. If I had the choice between a rifle like that and the M1 Garand, I would take the rifle that had the 30-round capacity, even though it is a manually operated system. I would also be able to carry much more 8mm Kurtz ammunition than I would be able to carry 30-06 in terms of weight. Now, there were actually extended magazines for these Mausers, like they were called trench mags, and they were just magazine extensions that were attached to the rifles, and they held like 20 rounds or something like that. But those still had to be fed from your 5-round stripper clips. They were not external magazines. I'm sure that they were removable, but they were meant to stay inside of the rifle and be fed from the top of the rifle. Whereas a Sturmgewehr mag, old mag out, new mag in. That's a very, very fast reloading system versus loading 5 rounds at a time through stripper clips. Not only that, but you got the full power rifle cartridge. So as a result, your follow-up shots are going to be considerably slower. Combine that with the fact that you have to cycle your bolt action, and you're really dealing with a tough time. Now, I will point out that the Volkssturm did have a semi-automatic sort of rifle that was not all that good. It was definitely a last-ditch style of rifle, but it took Sturmgewehr magazines, and that would also be a really good rifle to have if it was made better, because it was definitely made very shoddily. I feel like if that system was made in like 1944 instead of the Sturmgewehr style system, I feel like that really would have taken off. But this rifle is 8mm Mauser, not 8mm Kurtz. So this is a full power rifle, and we only have 5-round magazines. And I only have a couple of rounds inside of this magazine. But despite that, I could still run this pretty quickly. And like, of course, the bolt action system with a full power rifle cartridge, this is going to be slower than the M1 Garand's semi-automatic system. I could run the Garand faster than this right here. So, judging just from the base models, I would take the Garand. However, even if this was a full power rifle cartridge, if this took like, I don't know, an AR-10 style magazine, if you had an 8mm Mauser that took like an AR-10 style magazine, I know this technology didn't exist at the time, but this is hypothetically speaking, some sort of system to where you can pull out a 30-round mag, put in a new 30-round mag, and cycle your bolt and go back to town, then even with that, I would take the bolt action rifle with the increased capacity and speed of reloading over the semi-automatic in-block clip system of the M1 Garand. That's just my opinion. I'm sure that I'm going to have other people out there who wholeheartedly disagree with what it is that I have to say here. But I've had many Garands malfunction on me way, way too often. and you have to use like very specified ammunition for them in order to not get them to malfunction. It has to be good quality ammo, whereas something like this, run whatever the hell you want through something like this. But the preference, intermediate cartridge, easily reloadable, and bolt action. That would be quite the system, especially if it's a nice smooth bolt action. This right here is a Yugoslavian Mauser. It's not nearly as smooth as my German Mauser is, but I've already fired corrosive ammo through it, so that's why I'm kind of using this thing. But if I couldn't get everything that I wanted, I would still just take the increased capacity for the rifle and a way to easily reload it. That would be the preference. Well, actually the preference would be that intermediate cartridge as well. But if I couldn't have that, like let's say it's 1939 and 8mm Kurtz just doesn't exist yet and the war is just starting, I would absolutely have tried to figure out a way to get myself a Mauser that fed from some kind of external magazine. I don't know how much trouble I would have got in, but I would have tried to figure out some kind of way. That is a large bird. There's a large bird flying, and it's not Kevin. It's going right for my pond. But I would have tried to figure out a way to get myself some sort of external magazine system going for my rifles. Maybe I would have copied what the British were doing, depending on what front I was on, and be like, oh, look at that magazine system. I know in the town over there, there's a machinist, and I know I'm going to be here for the next month. Let me see if I can get myself something going, because, yeah, the 5-round magazine system for that simply is not my preference. I'm sure I'm going to have some people tell me why they were fed from stripper clips instead of external magazines, and they're going to be like, external magazines just weren't, the technology wasn't there, and you know, insert excuse here. Well, there was SMGs that had external magazines, and there were rifles that had external magazines, and plenty of rifles. Look at the BAR, for example, that had external magazines, and there were a lot of things out there. Handguns, most of your handguns during that time period had external magazines that fed those handguns. They did exist, the technology was there, and I mean, it could have been done, especially with how stamping technology, like sheet metal stamping technology, how far that had come with the war. As a matter of fact, the STG-44, that right there turned into a stamped rifle, and that's just what it was. And the magazines for that, those were all stamped metal and whatnot. It is possible to get what it is that I'm talking about here. Maybe not the most practical sense, considering everything, like considering giving every single troop that right there, that would require quite a bit. But it is possible. I will go ahead and say it is possible. Anyway, folks, appreciate your time. Thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are down below. Let me know if you agree with me or disagree with me. Would you take the rifle I had just described over an M1 Garand, or would you still prefer the M1 Garand? Of course, to be fair, even with today's modern stuff, there's a lot of people out there that prefer the M1 Garand because it's just what they know, and they have so much faith and confidence inside of the platform. And if that's your preference, then by all means, you go ahead and you do whatever it is that you're wanting to do. Anyway, thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check that out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you all at the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garand.
It's a shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.